Small talk. You know the drill. The weather, what you did over the weekend. For some people, it's a great social lubricant. But for others, it feels like trying to run a marathon in ski boots. If you've ever felt that way, hey, you are not alone. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the real psychology behind why some people just absolutely can't stand it. So let's just start with the biggest question, right? The one many of us have asked ourselves while, being stuck in a conversation about traffic. Why does this feel so profoundly draining? It's so much more than just being bored. And it turns out, there's a really fascinating reason for it. Okay, but before we get into the actual science of it all, we have to talk about this stereotype. Because there's this common image of people who visibly cringe at surface-level chats, and let's be honest, it's usually not a very flattering one. On one side, you have all the usual labels: antisocial, arrogant, rude, people who just aren't playing the game of social interaction. But what if that's not the real story? What if the reality has nothing to do with social skills and everything to do with having a different kind of brain? And this brings us to a really crucial distinction we have to make. For some people, it's not just about being annoyed by small talk. It's about being genuinely, physically exhausted by it. So here's the key point. We're not talking about a simple preference, like choosing coffee over tea. For a certain type of mind, being in a long small talk session is physically taxing. It's a real, legitimate sensation of being completely drained of all your energy. The big question is, why? And that, right there, brings us to the answer. This whole phenomenon seems to hinge on one single core concept that psychologists are really starting to focus on: a craving for depth. This is it. This is the key to everything we're talking about today: cognitive depth. It isn't just a desire. For some brains, it is a fundamental need. It's this deep-seated requirement to grapple with ideas that are complex, that present a real challenge, or that introduce something totally new. And without that, the brain basically feels starved. Just think of it like this. A brain that's wired for depth is constantly searching for 4 key ingredients. It needs complexity to chew on, a challenge to overcome, novelty to spark its interest, and a sense of meaning to tie it all together. And small talk, just by its very nature, offers, well, none of those things. Okay, so let's get into the mechanics of it. What is actually happening inside your head when you're forced to talk about the weather for the 10th time in a single day?
It's a really simple but incredibly powerful chain reaction. Your brain, which is primed for something deep, runs into a shallow conversation. It starts scanning for new ideas, for any complexity, and it finds nothing. So in response, it literally halts the release of dopamine. That's the chemical that signals reward and motivation. The results? That feeling of being mentally and physically unplugged.
And this quote from the research, it just says it all. The tap of that feel-good chemical literally gets turned off. It's not in your imagination, it's your brain chemistry reacting to a total lack of substance. Your brain is essentially saying, nope, there's nothing for me here, and it just powers down. So now that we have this new understanding of the brain chemistry, we can completely reframe that stereotype we started with. We can move away from all that judgment and get closer to some actual understanding. So the old view looked at a hatred of small talk as a social failing, maybe a character flaw, but the new, science-backed view sees it in a completely different light. It could be a sign of a deep brain, one that's simply wired for more substantial engagement. So the ultimate takeaway here is pretty clear. If you, or maybe someone you know, feels completely wiped out by small talk, it isn't a sign of being antisocial or arrogant. It's a sign of a brain that literally requires depth, complexity, and meaning just to feel energized and engaged. It's just a different operating system. So that leaves all of us with a little bit of a challenge, doesn't it? Knowing that some brains out there are just starved for substance, what meaningful conversation will you choose to start today? Thanks for joining this explainer.